They say love is patient, love is kind, love is eternal. But no one ever writes vows for the parts of love that rot in the shadows, for the thoughts you bury beneath satin sheets and Instagram smiles, for the ache that creeps in at 2 a.m. when the man sleeping next to you is perfect in every way except the one that counts. The way he makes you feel alive. Julia had spent the past 18 months curating her future like a museum exhibit, like a gallery of all the things a woman is supposed to want. White roses, crystal flutes, custom calligraphy. A man with a strong jawline and a stable job, parents who adored him, friends who said things like "you're so lucky," and meant it. But beneath all of it, under the flawless dress fittings and food tastings and spa weekends with bridesmaids, he barely recognized anymore. There was a silence growing inside her, a slow echoing hollowness she couldn't explain. She'd meet Michael's eyes across dinner tables and wonder how someone could love her so much and still not see her. How he could recite her Starbucks order from memory and still not know the way her soul flinched at routine. How he could plan every hour of their honeymoon in Santorini but never ask what kept her up at night. And then 1 week before the wedding, in a moment that should have never happened, she walked into that tiny bookstore by the pier. Not for any reason at all, not looking for anything, certainly not for anyone. And there he was, sitting in the poetry aisle, legs stretched out like he owned the place, reading Neruda like it was a prayer and the world wasn't burning outside. His name was Theo, and she should have walked away the second he looked up at her with those gray eyes that didn't blink, didn't flinch. Didn't pretend not to notice the way her fingers lingered on the spine of a book she had no intention of buying. They spoke like strangers who already knew each other's secrets, their words folding into each other like the corners of a letter never meant to be sent. And when he asked if she wanted coffee, she should have said no, but she didn't. She followed him down the boardwalk like she'd been waiting to her whole life, like the ring on her finger meant nothing at all, like this wasn't a cliff's edge and she wasn't already leaning forward. The coffee turned into a walk, the walk into a drink, the drink into a room she didn't remember booking, and when he kissed her, it wasn't fireworks, it was a mirror. It showed her who she really was when no one was watching. When it was over, she didn't cry, didn't confess, didn't run, she just lay beside him as if she belonged there, as if betrayal was a warm, inevitable thing. She told herself it was a mistake, a moment, a flicker of madness. But when he texted her the next day, she didn't block him. When he said he couldn't stop thinking about her, she didn't say don't. And when he asked what time the ceremony was, she told him. Just like that. Like a dare. Like a fire waiting for oxygen. All week, she played the part of the bride with the glow, the laughter, the soft touches on Michael's arm, the photos with her veil catching the golden hour just right. But inside, something monstrous had been born, and it whispered that she wanted to see what would happen when the truth was dragged, raw and bleeding, into the light. The morning of the wedding, her mother cried over her hair, her friends toasted mimosas, and Julia smiled like a woman with no blood on her hands. The vineyard was perfect, vines heavy with grapes, guests dressed in pastels and summer linen, the sky so clear it felt cruel. And when she walked down the aisle, the music swelling, her father holding her arm like tradition demanded, she spotted him. Third row left side. No tie. No apology. Just Theo watching her like a man who'd already lived this moment in a dream and came back for the ending. Her heart stuttered, her legs kept moving, and then she was standing in front of Michael, the man who would have built a world for her brick by brick without ever questioning if she wanted to live in it. The officiant began to speak. The words melted. Her hands were in his. Her lungs refused air. She glanced at Theo again and he nodded. Just once. Almost imperceptible. But enough. And she opened her mouth. Said 2 words. I can't. The world cracked, a collective gasp, her mother's hand flying to her mouth. Michael's face going still like a painting losing its color. Somewhere a child asked what was happening. And Julia stepped back, kicked off her shoes and walked down the aisle the wrong way, past stunned faces and whispered names, past everything she had built like a cathedral of lies, and didn't stop until she reached the edge of the vineyard, where the wind made her veil dance like it was mocking her. Theo didn't follow. Not at first. He waited. Let her stand in the wreckage of her choices. Let her feel it. The silence. The flicker of freedom. Then finally he came to her side. Not with promises. Not with comfort. Just presence. And together they stood, 2 people undone, 2 flames that had burned too close too fast. She didn't know what came next. Didn't care. Because for the first time in her life, Julia had chosen something without asking for permission. Without rehearsing. Without lying. She had chosen herself. And it hurt like hell, but it was real. And that was the thing no one prepares you for. Not the heartbreak you cause, not the wreckage you leave behind, not the guilt that spreads through your chest like spilled ink, but the silence, the kind that follows explosions, the kind that doesn't come with screams or slammed doors but with stares, phone calls that go unanswered, photos that are quietly deleted, group chats that no longer ping, and a mother who calls once then not again, because disappointment is heavier than rage and quieter. Julia didn't sleep that night, didn't undress, didn't cry. She just sat on the edge of a bed she hadn't chosen, in a hotel she barely remembered checking into, replaying every frame of the wedding that never was like it belonged to someone else. Theo had left sometime after sunset without a word, without a promise, because this wasn't a love story, not yet, maybe not ever. It was something messier, a collision more than a connection, and even now she didn't know if she had ruined her life or saved it. The news spread like wildfire, first through whispers, then through digital shockwaves. An aunt's Facebook post turned into speculation, then judgment, then memes, as if her life were a scene in someone else's drama. Michael didn't call. Not once. He vanished from her world with the grace of a man who knew better than to chase a woman who didn't know what she wanted. And wasn't that the truth? He didn't know. She only knew what she didn't want. She didn't want safety masquerading as passion. She didn't want brunch plans and beige furniture and children named after TV characters. She didn't want the kind of life that looked perfect in pictures and felt like drowning when the guests left and the candles burned out. She wanted fire, yes, but also silence, mystery, the space to be ugly and strange and lost. She wanted someone who saw the chaos in her and didn't flinch. And somehow, impossibly, Theo had. But the days after were not romantic. They were raw. Confusing. He texted sparingly, called once, didn't press. He seemed to understand that what had happened wasn't about him. Not entirely, that he had been the match, but the fire had been waiting for years. Julia found herself wandering the city like a ghost in denim. No ring, no title, no direction, just the name everyone now said with a mixture of awe and disgust, the runaway bride. Some said she was brave. Others said cruel. But no one asked her what it felt like to destroy the world that had been built for her, to tear off the mask only to find there was another beneath it. And then another still. She met Theo again a week later at the same bookstore, as if neither of them knew what else to do. He was reading the same book, and this time when he looked up, there was something softer in his eyes. No invitation, no expectation, just presence. They walked again, no coffee this time, no wine, just air and footsteps and the kind of silence that feels like listening. He asked how she was. She laughed. Said she didn't know. And he nodded like that made sense. They didn't kiss, just sat on a bench facing the sea. Two people orbiting the aftermath of something neither of them could name. She told him things she hadn't told anyone. How her childhood had been a performance, how love had always been something to earn, how even as a teenager she had practiced smiles in the mirror to make sure they looked natural. She told him she wasn't sure she knew how to be loved without pretending. He didn't offer solutions. Just listened. Really listened. And somehow that felt like more than any vow ever had. Still, even that wasn't enough to make her stay. Not yet. Julia knew the difference between impulse and truth, and while the first had gotten her out of the wedding, only the second could build whatever came next. So she left. Not forever. Just long enough. She rented a tiny apartment in a town where no one knew her name, started working part-time at a bakery where her hands were covered in flour more often than not, where no one asked about rings or guest lists or what went wrong. She read. A lot. Wrote in notebooks she never shared. Took long walks. Sometimes cried without knowing why. Sometimes smiled without needing a reason. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, she began to unlearn the version of herself that had been shaped by expectation. She stopped being a bride. But life doesn't let you walk away from your past without asking questions first, and even peace comes with a price when it's carved from chaos. So when Julia got the email, just one line, "I think we should talk," from Michael, it hit her harder than she expected, not because she wanted him back, not because she had regrets, but because closure is never neat, and forgiveness is a door you sometimes have to walk through just to remember why you left the house in the first place. And so she replied simply, "Okay," and they met in the most neutral place they could think of, a quiet cafe with more plants than people, where the coffee was strong and the music soft and everything seemed designed to soften the sharp edges of human hurt. And when she saw him again, Michael, the man she had almost married, the man she had shattered, she was struck not by guilt but by gratitude, because even though he had been wrong for her, he had loved her the best way he knew how, and he deserved more than silence. And so they talked not about the wedding, not about Theo, not about betrayal, but about truth, about how sometimes two good people are simply wrong for each other, how timing can be a lie, how expectations can feel like love when you've never known anything else. And Michael, to his credit, didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't try to hurt her back. Instead he nodded quietly and said he'd been angry. Of course he had, humiliated, devastated, confused, but after the fire burned out what remained was something simpler. Relief, because deep down he'd felt it too, that she was slipping away, that something in her had gone quiet and he'd ignored it, hoping love could fix what honesty wouldn't face. And now, looking at her, calmer, clearer, more herself than he'd ever seen her, he realized they'd both been actors in a play no one really wanted to see through to the end. And when he stood up to leave, he hugged her. Not tightly, not long, but enough to say, "I release you." And in that moment Julia felt something lift, like the last thread of a story that no longer needed to be told. And for days after, she walked lighter, smiled more often, spoke with fewer filters, because something about seeing the past face to face had reminded her that the future was still unwritten. And it was then, only then, that she began to love Theo, not as an escape, not as rebellion, but as a choice, a quiet, daily choice, because he never asked her to become anything for him, only to remain true to herself. And that kind of love is slow. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. It teaches you to stand on them. And as seasons passed and routines formed, mornings with coffee and laughter, evenings with poetry and quiet touches, Julia began to understand that commitment isn't a promise made in front of guests in pastel dresses. It's not a ring or a hashtag or a honeymoon. It's presence, daily, unwavering, the decision to stay even when it's not cinematic, even when it's hard, even when the fire turns to embers and all that's left is the gentle work of tending. And so when Theo asked her one night, not with a grand gesture, but with a handwritten note folded under her teacup, if she would consider building a life with him, not as a bride, not as a fantasy, but as a woman who knew what it meant to lose herself and find her way back, she said yes. Not like a fairy tale but like an anchor, and they moved forward not into a perfect story, but into a real one where healing and hurt shared space, one where the past was not erased but acknowledged, and love was not earned by sacrifice but by honesty. And years later, when strangers would ask if she regretted what she did, walking out, breaking hearts, choosing chaos, she would smile softly and say, "No, not because it was easy, not because it was painless, but because it was the first true thing I ever did." Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is unwrite the story everyone else gave them and dare to write a new one in their own voice.